Yeah.
That's not good.
When you do something for the first time, the chances are you ain't gonna be good at it. And while this ain't my first time being a part of an engine removal, it's definitely my first time ever pulling an engine like this, like in a garage by myself, at home alone. I assumed that the challenges would be plentiful. There'd be some busted knuckles, a whole lot of cussing. There'd be more trips to auto parts stores and hardware stores than I could imagine. A lot of sweat and a lot of time. And while I've had this on the forefront of my brain since the beginning of this build, it always hits a little different when it all actually happens. So if you've been following the build so far, then you know that the engine in my Fox needs lifters, or at least that's what the previous owner said. The funniest part is when I was doing some research, obviously before all of this, I quickly realized that, the lifters might not have even been the issue the whole time. Valve train noise can be caused by, I guess, a couple of different things, but we were already at the point of no return, so I decided to go ahead with the engine pool and changing the lifters anyway. After rounding a couple bolts on the header and talking to you guys in the comments, I finally decided that I was just going to pull the engine completely out, which started what ended up being a very long process for me. So after watching several videos and about 1,000 Google searches and reading some forums nearly as old as I am, I got to work. One of the biggest questions was whether to take the engine and trans out as a unit or to leave the trans in the car. Everywhere I searched, it kind of seemed like answers was mixed and never really leaned one way or another. Some said to pull the engine with the trans because it's easier. Some said to leave the trans in but pull it with the bell housing on. And some said just pull the engine by itself. With so many different answers, I actually messaged LMR on Instagram and asked for their opinion. They responded fairly quickly and said that they would leave the trans in. Why pull it if you don't have to? So I decided I felt the same way and I was just gonna pull it without the trans. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I like to work in a clean space. I feel like it helps me think, like process stuff better, and it just feels better all the way around to work somewhere where it's clean. And because this car had been sitting for so long, spiders loved it. So knowing that I was going to be under the car a lot, I decided to vacuum up as many webs and whatever else under the car that I could. Anyway, I started the pool by draining the radiator. If I'm being honest, I didn't think it was going to be much cooler in the system at all, due to some haunted suspicions. But as you can see here, that wasn't the case. So after that mess, I went to pull the radiator out of the car, and of course there was more coolant inside of it. After that, I plugged a lot of the openings that were left on the engine to keep even more stuff out that was probably already down there anyway because of the way the engine had been sitting for so long. Then I had to get most of the front assembly off and out of the way, including some shoddy wiring from the car's previous life. The day was going slow, but it was going well. I even got one of the bell housing bolts out, and so on to the next day I went. So the next day I decided I was going to shoot the underbody because I don't think I've shown y'all how messed up some of it is. To me it looked like a lot of improper jack placement, or maybe even fell off some jacks, or maybe even been in a wreck. But at this point, like I said, I own this car and I'm here now, so next was getting the exhaust disconnected from the header. And this is where a lot of the pain and frustration began. Because for starters, I didn't have the right side socket to get the nuts off, but that wasn't a real big issue because the trip to Harbor Freight got me what I needed. The biggest issue was that these nuts was rusty as hell, and trying to get them off was a bit of a pain. Now, with a little penetrating oil and this weak impact from Craftsman and some strength, 3 of the 4 nuts finally came off, but one nut would not come off. I worked all day and could not get it free, so once the rain started, I decided that was it for me. The next day, my boy Ken stopped by to lend me a hand. Now, neither of us have a ton of experience working on cars like this, but an extra set of eyes and hands is always appreciated, so shout out to my dog Ken, you are more help than you realize. After waving the white flag with that one nut, I decided just to cut the exhaust out. It was rusty and tired anyway, so added to the list of parts that I already got to buy for the car. And while it was only supposed to be the front of the exhaust getting cut, the rear was welded, so I was like, forget it, cut it too. But that worked, and eventually the exhaust was out. So on day, I don't even know what day it was, it felt different than the rest of the days. The exhaust was out, and all I had to do was get the rest of the bell housing bolts, the engine mount bolts, and soon the engine will be free. I mean, that's simple, right? Yeah, right. I struggled a little bit with where to put the bolts for the chains on the engine hoist, but after a little bit of Googling, I found a solution that would work. So it always seemed like I was one step forward and 2 steps back with this pull. I mean, every time I covered some ground, something else had to go wrong. It always seemed like it was one bolt or one nut or one something that was just keeping me from getting the engine out of this car. Maybe I should have took that as a sign. After hooking up the chains, I began to undo the remaining bell housing bolts. Eventually I had to recruit my wife to help me because the starter bolts are the worst. And getting the bolts from the underside wasn't terrible, but it definitely ain't fun. So even surrounded by the help and love from my family, I ain't gonna lie, I was defeated. Another day had gone by and the engine was still in the car. I really was starting to second guess the whole thing. A day later, I decided to give the starter bolt one more try. And thankfully 4 or 5 extensions, a U-joint adapter later, the starter bolt was loose. This was it. I only needed to get the engine mount bolts off and the whole thing would be free. The engine mounts faulted me a little bit, so instead of disconnecting them from the body of the car, I just unbolted them from the engine itself, and in the process broke a bolt off in the block. So hopefully that's fixable, but at this point it probably doesn't matter. So after that struggle, regardless, the engine was out. Celebrated with the family, took some pictures, because like 2 weeks had gone by. I had been fighting this every day, sweating my ass off in the garage, and I was just happy to have the engine out. But maybe I should have saved the celebration until So yeah, my worst fears were realized. I pulled the plug and sure enough, a bunch of coolant starts coming out of the oil pan before I even see engine oil. And that's the one thing I was hoping I didn't see. So with the little knowledge that I do have and a couple Google searches, it would seem to me that one of the head gaskets or both have failed. And if that's the case, then this entire engine is probably no good. And I say assume because I still haven't pulled the heads off the engine yet. I was doing this late in the day, and by the time I got this bad news, it was about time for me to be done, and I had had enough disappointment. So now is the time for me to ask questions. So the biggest question is, now what? I really want this car running and driving by the end of summer, but I don't know how realistic that is. And to give y'all just some ideas of what I plan to do with this car in the future is I really kind of want to build a naturally aspirated, kind of high horsepower circuit racing style of build. Maybe pro touring if that makes more sense. But that's a long ways from now, and that's going to also require an engine swap that's really expensive and I just can't afford to do. So I find myself asking, how do I proceed? You know, I can go to a junkyard, try to find another motor, or do I save and try to put something in there to get me by until I build the engine that I want to build? At this point, I kind of just don't know. I'm kind of disappointed that it may not be savable because I actually think it would have been kind of fun to, you know, build the engine and document the process, but that really just might not be worth the time or the money. So at this point, I just got to figure out how to move forward and get things done. So if you're still watching up until this point, first off, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for continuing to support this channel and support me and look at this journey that I'm documenting. I also want to say too that Wheeled isn't just about the build of this Mustang. Wheeled is about cars and car culture and loving and falling in love with that. And to that point, I have some more things coming for the channel that I hope you guys really love and really enjoy. And until then, I'll see you next time. Peace.